Hey everyone! Welcome back to Story Hive. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Let's jump into today's story. My parents mistreated me during my childhood, so I left them. Now, when my grandfather has left me money my parents wanted as compensation for their parenting. I'm 32 years old and grew up in a household where money and appearances were everything. My parents were obsessed with material possessions and social status, but they never cared about actually being good parents or creating a loving family environment. They were selfish and only focused on their own wants and needs. From my earliest memories, I felt like an afterthought in my own home. My parents' relationship was chaotic at best. They'd have explosive arguments followed by extravagant makeup gifts to each other. I'd hide in my room during their fights, covering my ears to block out the shouting. When things were calm, they'd ignore each other. And me? My mother came from old money but had been cut off by her family for reasons I never fully understood. She resented this and was determined to prove she could be even wealthier on her own. My father was from a working-class background and had a chip on his shoulder about it. He was always trying to show he belonged in high society. Together they were a toxic combination of status-seeking and materialism. Growing up, I never had what I needed. My clothes were always old and worn out because my parents thought spending money on kids' clothes was a waste. I rarely got new school supplies. I'd have to make do with leftover pencil stubs and half-used notebooks. We lived in a big house in an upscale neighborhood, but my room was basically empty except for a bed and a desk I found on the curb. Meanwhile, my parents constantly bought new cars, designer clothes, and went on expensive vacations usually without me. I started working part-time jobs when I was 14, lying about my age to get hired. My first job was at a local grocery store, stocking shelves after school and on weekends. By 16, I was working 30-plus hours a week while going to school full-time. I had jobs at fast food restaurants, as a gas station attendant, mowing lawns, anything I could find. My parents took most of my paychecks, claiming it was for rent and to teach me responsibility, but I knew they were just using me to fund their lifestyle. The rest of our family couldn't stand my parents. My mother's parents had disowned her years ago. My father's family, while not wealthy, were kind, hard-working people who were disgusted by how my parents behaved. My aunts, uncles, and cousins on both sides slowly cut contact over the years. Even my paternal grandparents, who lived nearby, rarely visited. I found out later it was because they couldn't bear to see how I was being treated. I have memories of birthdays where no one showed up because my parents hadn't bothered to invite anyone or had actively discouraged people from coming because they didn't want to waste money on a kid's party. One year, when I turned 12, I got up excited for my birthday only to find the house empty. My parents had gone on a weekend trip and forgotten it was my birthday entirely. I spent the day alone, heating up a frozen dinner and watching television. Christmases were no better. I'd get nothing or maybe one small cheap gift, while my parents exchanged expensive jewelry, electronics, and designer items. One Christmas when I was 9, I got a used coloring book with half the pages already colored and a broken toy car my dad had found in his office. Meanwhile, my mom unwrapped a diamond necklace and my dad got a new Rolex. I was often left home alone for days at a time, starting when I was about 12, so they could go on trips. They'd leave some money for pizza and tell me not to answer the door or phone. I'd spend these days in constant anxiety, jumping at every noise and worrying about what would happen if there was an emergency. School was a challenge because my parents couldn't be bothered with any part of it. I had to forge their signatures on permission slips and report cards. Parent-teacher conferences would come and go without them showing up. When I needed help with homework, I was on my own. Despite this, I managed to do well in school. It was my escape in a way. Teachers were often the only adults who showed any interest in my well-being. There was never any physical abuse, but the emotional neglect was constant. My parents would criticize everything about me, my appearance, my interests, my friends. On the rare occasions I was allowed to have friends over, nothing was ever good enough. They'd compare me unfavorably to the children of their wealthy friends, asking why I couldn't be more like them. As soon as I turned 18, I left and never looked back. I'd been planning my escape for years, saving every penny I could hide from my parents. I put myself through college working multiple jobs. It was hard, but still better than living with them. I went completely no contact, changed my number, moved across the country, the works. I heard through extended family that they barely noticed I was gone. Over the past 14 years, I've built a good life for myself. I have a successful career in software development, a modest but comfortable house, and some savings, all the things my parents prioritized, but I earned them honestly. I also have close friends who are like family to me. I've done a lot of work in therapy to process my childhood and learn to form healthy relationships. I thought I'd put all the drama with my parents behind me. Then, last week, I got a call from my grandmother, my dad's mom. We hadn't spoken in years, but she'd managed to track me down. My grandfather had passed away recently. Apparently, he'd left me a significant inheritance, a trust fund he'd been putting money into for me since I was born. He must have seen how my parents were and wanted to make sure I'd be taken care of. I was touched that my grandfather had thought of me even though we weren't close. The inheritance isn't life-changing, but it's a nice nest egg that will help secure my future. I told my grandmother I was grateful, and we had a good conversation catching up after all these years. She filled me in on some family news and apologized for not doing more when I was younger. It was a bittersweet conversation, but overall positive. Somehow my parents found out about the inheritance. Now they're blowing up my phone demanding that I give them the money. They're saying I owe them for raising me and that they deserve compensation for being my parents. They're threatening to sue me if I don't hand it over. I'm furious. They were terrible parents who neglected and exploited me. Now they think they're entitled to money that my grandfather left specifically for me. No way. I told them to pound sand and block their numbers again, but I'm worried they might actually try to take legal action. Can they really sue me for this? Do I need to get a lawyer? I don't want to give them a penny, but I also don't want to get dragged into a long legal battle. Any advice on how to handle this would be appreciated. Update 1. Thanks for all the supportive comments on my last post. A lot has happened in the past couple of weeks. First, I took the advice many of you gave and consulted with a lawyer. He assured me that my parents have absolutely no legal claim to my inheritance. The trust was set up solely in my name by my grandfather, so it's 100 mine. My lawyer sent my parents a strongly worded cease and desist letter telling them to back off. Unfortunately, it didn't stop them. A few days after my lawyer sent the letter, I was served with actual lawsuit papers. My parents are suing me for parental support and trying to claim my inheritance as repayment for raising me. The lawsuit is full of lies about how they supposedly sacrificed everything for me and how ungrateful I am. Reading through their claims brought back a lot of painful memories I tried to forget, like the time when I was 10 and broke my arm falling off my bike. I'd been riding alone because my parents never taught me or bought me safety gear. When I came home crying, my mom yelled at me for interrupting her television show. My parents refused to take me to the doctor because they had tickets to a concert that night. I ended up having to call my friend's mom to take me to the ER. My parents were furious about the medical bill and grounded me for a month for being careless. There were so many instances of neglect and emotional abuse, times they forgot to pick me up from school and I had to walk miles home. I remember one winter evening when I was 13 waiting outside the school for hours in the freezing cold. When I finally got home, Blue-lipped and shivering, my parents were hosting a dinner party and told me to go to my room so I wouldn't bother the guests. The lawsuit also brought up memories of the screaming fights where they'd tell me I was worthless, and they wished I'd never been born. Anytime I did something they didn't like, got to be on a test, forgot to do a chore, or even just expressed an opinion they disagreed with, it would trigger a lecture about how I was a disappointment and a burden. There was constant criticism about my appearance, my grades, everything. Nothing was ever good enough for them. I remember when I was 16, I saved up for months to buy a guitar. Music was my passion and my escape. The day I brought it home, my father smashed it to pieces, saying I was wasting my time on silly hobbies instead of focusing on getting into an Ivy League school. One particularly vivid memory their lawsuit brought up was my high school graduation. I'd worked so hard to graduate with honors despite everything. My parents didn't even show up to the ceremony. They were on a luxury cruise in the Caribbean. I had to go alone, and my friends' families were there to support me. My mom sent me a text saying it was the first time I'd really felt how alone I was in the world. My parents' lawsuit was like reopening old wounds. It's been hard to deal with the emotions of confronting my past and realizing that they have no remorse for how they treated me. They still believe they have a right to my money and that they did nothing wrong. I'm trying to stay strong and focus on the fact that this is just another way they're trying to control and hurt me. I'm working with my lawyer to prepare a strong defense, and I'm considering filing a counterclaim for emotional distress. I know this will be a long and difficult process, but I'm determined to stand my ground and protect what my grandfather left me. Thanks for the support and advice. It's really helping me through this challenging time. Update 2. I wanted to give another update on the situation with my parents and the lawsuit. The process has been draining, but there have been some positive developments. I've continued working closely with my lawyer, and we are moving forward with a counterclaim for emotional distress. We are gathering evidence to demonstrate the long-term impact of my parents' treatment and how it has affected my life. Interestingly, after the cease and desist letter and the lawsuit, I received an unexpected call from a private investigator. It turns out that my parents had been contacting some of my friends and former acquaintances, trying to dig up dirt on me to use in court. They were spreading lies and making baseless accusations. Luckily, my friends and colleagues saw through their attempts and refused to cooperate. They've been incredibly supportive, providing statements about my character and how I've overcome the difficulties of my past. On a personal note, I've been focusing on self-care and trying to maintain a positive outlook. I've started attending a support group for adult survivors of neglect and emotional abuse, which has been incredibly therapeutic. Hearing other people's stories and sharing my own has helped me process my feelings and feel less isolated. The group has also provided practical advice and coping strategies for dealing with ongoing legal battles and emotional stress. I've also been in touch with some distant family members who were previously estranged. They reached out to express their support and share their own frustrations with how my parents have acted. It's been comforting to reconnect with them and feel like there's a network of people who understand what I've been through. Despite the ongoing legal struggle, I'm committed to standing up for myself and ensuring that my grandfather's legacy is honored. I'm hopeful that the court will see through my parents' attempts to exploit the situation and recognize the true nature of their claims. Thank you all for your continued support and encouragement. It means the world to me. Final update. I wanted to provide a final update on the situation with my parents and the lawsuit. After several months of legal battles and emotional turmoil, there's finally been a resolution. My lawyer and I put together a compelling case showing how my parents' claims were baseless and how their actions over the years constituted neglect and emotional abuse. We presented evidence of their behavior, including testimonies from friends, former teachers, and family members who witnessed or were aware of the situation. The The court also reviewed the documentation from the trust fund, which was explicitly set up for me by my grandfather. In a recent court hearing, the judge ruled in my favor. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning my parents cannot bring this claim against me again. The judge acknowledged the abuse and neglect I experienced and commended me for standing up for myself. It was a significant relief and a huge weight off my shoulders. I also filed a counterclaim for emotional distress, and the court awarded me a modest amount to cover legal fees and some compensation for the psychological impact of the ordeal. The process was long and draining, but it was worth it to finally have some closure and validation for my experiences. Since the court case, I've been focusing on moving forward with my life. I'm continuing with therapy and have found new ways to channel my experiences into positive outlets, including volunteering with organizations that support survivors of abuse and neglect. It's been empowering to use my story to help others who have faced similar challenges. I've also reconnected with some of my extended family members, and it's been heartwarming to rebuild those relationships. Their support has been invaluable, and it's nice to have a network of people who genuinely care about me. As for my parents, they've been silent since the ruling. I've chosen to maintain my distance and focus on my well-being. While the past will always be a part of me, I'm determined to build a future that's filled with love, respect, and self-care. Thank you all for the incredible support and advice throughout this journey. Your encouragement helped me stay strong during some very tough times. I'm grateful for the community I've found here and for everyone who has been a part of this chapter in my life. Thanks for tuning in to today's Reddit story. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on more amazing stories. See you next time.